In the early to mid-1800s, tensions in America between the North and the South started to rise, with the Compromise of 1850 and Bleeding Kansas increasing tensions even more. This led to the Civil War. During the Civil War, Lincoln made the Emancipation Proclamation, turning the idea of war toward slavery. During this time, John Wilkes Booth was born, and when Abraham Lincoln gave a speech about having African Americans become full citizens, this caused Booth to make a plot to kill Lincoln. He became one of the most influential people in history by killing Lincoln. With that action, he set the United States on a course for civil rights a century after his death. When Booth killed Lincoln, this led to Johnson's presidency, where he failed Reconstruction. That led to a segregated South, and as a reaction to that segregated South, the Civil Rights Movement was born. On May 10th, 1838, John Wilkes Booth was born. He was the second youngest of 10 children. In his early years, he attended Milton Boarding School for Boys. Then, later, he attended Timothy's Hall. When he turned 17, he started acting in Shakespeare's Richard III. His performance was so good he went on tour all over the country. Later in his life, Booth joined the Know Nothing Party, and then showed his support for slavery by aiding the capture of John Brown. Before the Civil War, Booth gained much popularity in theater. During the Civil War, Booth served as a spy for the Confederacy. He also planned to kidnap the president, but that failed. Frustrated at the failure of the kidnapping plot, Booth used his popularity at the Ford Theater to gain access to Lincoln's balcony and shot him in the back of the head. After shooting Lincoln, Booth jumped onto the stage and yelled, "Sic semper tyrannis, the South is avenged." Because Booth assassinated Lincoln, Andrew Johnson took office. When Johnson was in office, he said he wanted to follow Lincoln's plan for Reconstruction. Johnson also started to pardon most of the Confederacy's government. Johnson pardoned over 12,000 people by June 5, 1866. Many being military leaders such as Major General James L. Kemper. He was also the 37th governor of Virginia and helped lead Pickett's charge. On December 25, 1868, Johnson issued a full pardon to all of the people who served under or were a part of the Confederacy, which led to most of them being brought back into power. With these people back in power, they started to create Jim Crow laws that oppressed and kept African Americans as second-class citizens. These laws, such as segregation laws, literacy tests, and poll taxes, were meant to keep them from being full citizens, and from being able to vote, even though they have the right to vote. In the book Andrew Johnson's Civil War and Reconstruction, Paul H. Bergeron argues that Johnson applied a racist reasoning towards his actions in Reconstruction. Because of these inequalities in Jim Crow laws, the African Americans started to rise up in defiance against the racism and mistreatment that they had faced in America. The Civil Rights Movement and the March on Washington, led by Martin Luther King Jr., was a reaction to the existing Jim Crow laws in the South and the segregation in America. Author Eldon D. Morris argues that civil rights movement was not only a response to the Jim Crow laws, it was also able to overcome those Jim Crow laws by the success of the nonviolent protests, such as the March on Washington, D.C.
I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation.
After Booth killed Lincoln, Andrew Johnson pardoned the Confederacy. The pardoned Southern governments created Jim Crow laws to oppress African Americans. This led to the creation of the Civil Rights Movement in opposition to those equalities. The Civil Rights Movement shaped what modern America would become. This is the reason John Wilkes Booth is one of the most influential people in American history.